Hi everybody, great to see you and thank you for joining us this afternoon. Welcome to the second part of a two-part webinar series, Leadership in Time of Crisis, organised by a small but energetic group from the current cohort of the LIBER Emerging Leaders Programme, a project launched and coordinated by Najme Shanghai from the University Library of Southern Denmark. As well as the speakers, whom I will introduce in a minute, I should also mention here and thank Tanya Yankelevich from the LIBER office, who's helped to make this webinar a reality and is here today to manage all the logistics. This webinar series provides an opportunity to hear about what others in leadership positions are doing, to exchange views and to learn from one another. And as you will have seen, in coordination with our theme of leadership in times of crisis and working online, we have had a couple of slight technical issues, but we're hoping that they're behind us. But if they recur, please bear with us and bear in mind it's part of the theme of the programme. I'm Katrina Cannon. I'm the Deputy Librarian at the Bodleian Libraries of the University of Oxford, and importantly for today, I'm a member of the LIBER Leaderships Programme Working Group since 2017, and I'm delighted to be hosting this second webinar on the topic. It follows on from last week's webinar hosted by Cecile Spiatek, also a member of the working group. Some practical points before we start. Speakers will use Slido to ask us some key questions during the webinar, and the links will be posted in the chat. The results are anonymous, but they will be recorded as a cumulative result and shared in the course of the seminar. They're part of the content. Please use the chat box to make comments or initiate discussion on any aspect of leadership in times of crisis. Please also use the chat to raise questions, which we will take at the end of the speakers. And please put any technical questions in the chat. They'll be answered by Tanya. We also wanted to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the LIBER website. The slides will also be available on Zenodo. Last week's webinar is now available in the same way. Also to say that the chat won't be recorded, but the content will be anonymized and used by the organizers of the webinar to write a LIBER blog post and an article in LIBER Quarterly Journal. I also want to take a moment on behalf of LIBER and to encourage you to sign up for another event on a similar topic. It's a panel discussion that's happening on the 4th of December, so very soon. And the results of the recent LIBER COVID-19 survey will be presented at that panel discussion. But in addition, the panelists will discuss how European research libraries responded to the crisis and how to effectively plan for the future through collaborative measures. So very much following on from the two webinars, today's and the last one. Now, back to today. Last week's webinar focused on how are research libraries leading in times of COVID-19. Today, we're going to follow up with new challenges and leading into the post-COVID recovery for research libraries. Thoughtful leaders in all sectors around the world already faced multiple challenges and uncertainties that were making them reevaluate their approach to how they led. A global pandemic has immeasurably added to these challenges and uncertainty, but it's also highlighted and accelerated the need for us to reassess and question our approach. Today's webinar will follow on from last week's in doing just that, and it's divided into two halves. The first, communication in a time of crisis. The second, what do we keep? New challenges leading in the post-COVID recovery. So now, without further ado, on behalf of LIBER and the Leaderships Programme Working Group, I'm delighted to welcome our first three speakers for today. Mark Cohen, Head of Library Resources and Collections from Queen Mary University of London. Emma Nolan, the Head of Information Resources and Scholarly Publishing at Malmö University Library. Elke Geskier from the Head of Tubergen Libraries, KU Leuven, Belgium. So I'm going to hand over now to Mark.
Okay, before I start, I'd be very interested to hear your view question on the pandemic. Is to go to www.slido.com and enter 33469, and please answer the question. Right. That's very interesting. Thank you for that. Okay, so I'm going to start this presentation by discussing the challenges and advantages of online tools which we're currently using to communicate with due to the pandemic crisis, due to the increase in home working. When most people think about using online tools to communicate, they tend to first of all think about the challenges. So the first challenge is it's a lot more time consuming. It's so much easier to go up to somebody in an office and have a chat with them. Also, if you can't see somebody, you obviously lose the physical clues, which are very important in terms of body language. The second challenge is we're all getting an increased number of emails. And this is because emails are now the primary means of communication. This has caused a number of stresses. First of all, it's difficult to keep on top of inboxes. Secondly, the tone of emails are difficult to judge. And finally, it's often difficult to make yourself understood by email. The third challenge is team building. It's very difficult to build a team virtually. You see each other less often, and team building activities are quite limited. This can be a particular problem if you have a new member of your team who's never met their colleagues face to face. Patrick Lencioni, in his book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, shows how crucial team building is for the success of an organization. Fourthly, broadband speed and connectivity can be a big problem. It's not unusual in during a meeting for somebody to get thrown out because of Wi-Fi issues, or a crucial point in a meeting can be missed due to poor connectivity. And finally, I've put on this slide that often people talk on top of each other during virtual meetings as well. But this last issue can actually be managed because the chair of a meeting can use facilities like raise a hand and the chat functionality. However, it's also important to note there are some advantages with the shift in using online tools to communicate. I think the main thing is we've all quickly learned how to use more tools. For example, project planners are being used much more to keep track of project development. For example, I'm currently involved in a project to implement a new library services platform. And at the beginning of the pandemic, we started using SharePoint to share information about this project. A simple feature in Teams and Zoom as well is the ability to share your screen or share documents when talking to somebody. Although this is very simple, a lot of people have mentioned how this has really eased their communication. And finally, we've become accustomed to using tools other than conventional Outlook to send e-communications. So Slack and the chat function in Teams are two examples. These tools provide alternatives to email and allow all correspondence related to particular topics to be kept in one place. For example, when we were planning this webinar, we decided rather than using email to communicate, we'd set a WhatsApp group instead. Also, some people find that you can use the chat functionality to replace going over to somebody's desk in a shared office to ask a very quick question. And similarly, if in a meeting you find it difficult to get your point in, there's always an option now to send a chat message instead. So, now that we've discussed the tools which we've got available, we've got to address the question, how do you effectively communicate with colleagues during a crisis? Well, the first thing is to make sure that your staff are kept updated. Staff are now less likely to find out what is happening than when they spent their working day in an office shared with their colleagues. In my institution's library, staff receive 2 weekly emails to help them keep informed. One email is sent by the university to all staff in the university by the principal. And this email allows staff members to stay updated as to what is happening in the university, particularly because the guidance from the English government changes constantly. The second email which they receive is from the university librarian, and this contains news relating to the library. The third method of communicating, which I put on this slide, is the fortnightly staff forums which take place in my university library. These can be used both to impart knowledge, also sometimes you just go around and everybody gets an opportunity to have a few minutes and tell the others what they're working on. So, how should you communicate as a leader during a crisis? Well, probably the most important thing for somebody managing staff is to ensure the staff who they line manage are safe. The practice where I work is to have weekly one-to-ones with direct reports, where the line manager inquires about the member of staff's well-being. Secondly, the leaders need to keep calm themselves. This can be very challenging when things are constantly changing. However, if the line manager stays calm, this will rub off onto those he or she is line managing. Thirdly, any instructions must be clear. Being physically distant means more opportunities for misunderstandings. A tip is to always follow up on what you've agreed with clearly worded emails. And finally, it's good practice for a leader to have sight of everybody's schedule. Being based in separate locations should not mean that you don't know what your direct reports are doing. These are the techniques which I have learned from this pandemic. I'd now like to hand you over to Emma, who's going to talk to you about different ways of communicating.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you all for listening. Mark was talking about different tools and communication during crisis. I will start by telling you a brief background of the situation here at Malmö University Library in Sweden. The university is a young university, 20 years old, and it has 3 libraries and is situated at the south of Sweden, only Öresund dividing from Denmark. There are around 24,000 students and 900 researchers. In March, when COVID came to Sweden, our university switched education principally to a digital format. But deciding whether or not to close the library was a decision for the university director, not the library director. It was decided that our library should be one of the premises that should remain open. One strong argument for this was that the library is an important workplace for our students and a key space for the students to be able to access throughout their education. We did, however, close the library for the public during the spring, and we also closed the information desks. Instead, we staffed phone, email, and chat to a greater extent to meet user needs. During this autumn, we have opened up the information desks again, and the library is currently open for the public for a limited time during the day. We asked the staff to work from home to a greater extent unless they had work assignments that required them to be at work. A couple of years ago, we inaugurated flexible workplaces. This means that all co-workers are equipped with laptops, mobile phones, and most people in Sweden have internet connection at their home. In my department, I have 23 colleagues working within the field of information resources and scholarly publishing. So In March, I created an Excel list of all co-workers and booked a Zoom meeting with each co-worker where the agenda was related to the work environment regarding working from home, the personal well-being, and if they needed any help with prioritizing among their assignments. This was in the very beginning of our steep curve on going digital. Since we were all having a great many Zoom meetings, I did not feel that this was the best format. It did not give that extra energy, but it was good to see each other and have a structured agenda, and also see to see if there was someone who needed additional support. As the next step, I booked a distance walk and talk, where I arranged phone meetings with all co-workers in my department, and this was just before our summer vacation. The co-worker took a walk where he or she was working, and I where I was working. I also enclosed reflective questions relating to the new work situation. We talked about both positive and negative consequences on an individual basis and on the different groups that he or she is part of. I also asked them to reflect on what they could enhance and do differently. This was a format that I found created a better energy, both in the sense that both of us were moving, and also in the sense that sending out reflective questions made a more meaningful and deep dialogue. These were so successful that I will continue with them once we get back to normal. And then it's group communication. I have scheduled meetings with all my groups starting in December. I have 12 groups, and each group has an assignment description. It is not very detailed, but mainly the framework for the group. The meetings will be kind of a performance appraisal on a group level, and I will use Zoom to go through with these meetings. Then it's staff meeting. We have them twice a month. And this has not changed because of COVID. However, now we have the staff meetings online via Zoom instead of having physical meetings. Every second week for the entire library, about 50 people attend, and every other for my department with 23 people. In our staff meetings, we usually start off by doing a check-in, and normally we are physically at the library. We do this in pairs. However, since we see each other more seldom now, we have done this more often in the big format. A typical check-in question would be, what is my expectation for this meeting? Or what am I working with currently? To my understanding, this has been greatly appreciated since it gives you a feeling of context and belonging, not only for yourself, but also for the entire department that you don't meet on a daily basis. We invited an ergonomic expert to talk about the home office in the spring at one staff meeting, and we also tried to use the feature breakout sessions in Zoom, where colleagues have been asked to discuss in small groups and report back via Padlets relating, for instance, to COVID-19 solutions, etc. And strategy day. The university library uses the university strategy as our own. We have defined goals for the library that is connected to the goals in the university strategy, and together with the operational plan for the two departments at the library form the business plan. In the operational plan, we have strategic activities that is connected to the goals for the library. When we went digital in March, we already had our department's operational plan in the Microsoft Tool Planner that Mark was talking about earlier. We also had different co-workers assigned to the different activities. This made it possible to follow the process of the strategic activities in my department. In the end of October, I had a strategy day via Zoom for 5 hours in order to design the operational plan for 2021. The day included warm-up session, working on your own and in groups, and of course, lots of breaks. We used Google Presentation as a tool for documentation. as it gave a feeling of the other groups were present even though you did not see each other physically. I think many of the colleges were a bit hesitant in the beginning due to the long digital format, but it went very well and there were great energies in the breakout rooms. The day ended with a feedback session with groups talking about the different activities they saw for 2021. I enclosed the background material in the calendar booking, and the material was also handed out physically in the post boxes at the library, along with a ginger shot and a nice chocolate. Thank you all for listening, and now over to Elke.
Hi everybody. I think unfortunately poor Elke's having trouble getting through to us, even though we can see her Slido and her presentation. So I think what we might now need to do is to move across to our second three speakers. Here's somebody tapping. We're trying to get Elke to refresh the page, so we're hoping very much that we will be back with you in a sec. In the meantime, I thought I might make some observations about what we've heard, and I would like to encourage you all to continue to put things into the attendee chat. Any questions, any comments that you have to make, any tips that you have. We've had a lot of experience shared with us. I was really interested to see the two words coming up in the Wordle, challenging and important around communications. So I think, you know, there's lots of food for thought for all of us. So please do start to add things to the attendee chat, questions, comments, anything you want to say about leadership in times of crisis, but maybe particularly with reference to what Mark and Emma have said. So in the meantime, while we try and get Elke back again, we are going to skip through, and I'm going to move through to our next set of slides. So the second half of the webinar is around what do we keep, new challenges leading in the post-COVID recovery. So we're looking towards the future, maybe with three concurrent vaccines going on at the moment. There is maybe some hope that around Easter or summer, we may be able to look to the future and keep the lessons that we've learned. So our three speakers, whom I'd like to introduce now, are Núria Casaldaliga, the Director of the Libraries at the Universitat Autónoma de Barcelona in Spain, Claire Knowles, Head of Research Support and Digital Libraries from Leeds, and Fiona Morley, the Head of Digital Programmes and Information Systems from Maynooth University Library in Ireland. So we're going to move on with them, and then we will come back, hopefully, to Elke and hear the last of our the last section of our previous presentation. But in the meantime, over to you, Núria.
Well, thank you, Catriona, and good afternoon, everyone. In the second part, we are going to reflect about what do we keep from what has happened in our libraries since last March. To do this exercise, we will start by quoting Daniel Goleman when he says, To imagine tomorrow, we need three things: positive thinking, a strong foothold in reality, and a deep and enduring sense of purpose. When we started to prepare these webinars, we thought that the pandemic might be over by now. Well, actually, we're in the middle of a second wave, and a third one is expected in January. Therefore, apart from trying to reflect on what is the new normal, another question appeared: when will it happen? According to Deloitte, there are 5 critical actions to return to normality that can help organizations such as libraries to respond and to thrive after the crisis. The 5 are: reflect, recommit, re-engage, rethink, and review. Reflect means have time to think about what we have learned and will come next. Recommit, reinforce commitment to well-being and purpose. Re-engage, redistribute the staff as they are trained in the necessary skills. Rethink, set new priorities. And review, restart in line with these new priorities. In our presentation, we are going to share some ideas on what has changed in our workforce, meaning human resources, work practices, we have gone digital, and workplaces, our library spaces. I will highlight some relevant aspects related to human resources. Let me start with remote working. One of the changes that will continue from now on is remote working. There were some previous experiences of remote working in libraries before, like some minutes ago, Emma commented. But working from home was by no means a general policy. Library staff have usually been associated with large buildings and long opening hours. According to Gartner, the percentage of remote working will increase from 30% to 48%, depending on the countries, because another consultancy firm says that the number will go from 9% to 43%. To give you an example, in my university, Universitat Autònoma of Barcelona, previously the percentage of library staff working from home was small, less than 5%, while we are now divided into small teams and working from home 2 or 3 days per week. Remote working involves other aspects like flexible work schedules and good time management. Also having the necessary technological equipment and an adequate working space besides dealing with family issues. One of the challenges is measuring task accomplishment correctly. This evaluation must be based on output, but an essential component of remote work is the trust we have in our colleagues. Moving to skills, the role of each member of staff is clearer with regard to on-site work, when a person is behind the frontline desk or in an office, but on the screen, there is an equalizing effect and personal skills can stand out more than roles. We should encourage staff to develop critical skills rather than preparing them for a next specific role. Traditionally, our libraries were generally focused on improving the efficiency of the processes, while now we need to think of a structure that allows us to increase agility and flexibility. People with a broader knowledge base then can adapt more quickly if the workflow needs to be changed at any time. The pandemic has been an immersive learning experience. Libraries should provide additional technology training and identify essential technology and all kinds of skills for employees in this new normality. It's important to think of the library staff as a whole and work in order not to leave anyone behind. Apart from technical skills, others that had already been identified as key skills have not changed very much. Innovative thinking, creativity, proving value, and those related with digital or open science that LIBER has analyzed have not changed much either. Let's now turn to working habits. Another big change that COVID-19 has brought are mobility restrictions. We have reduced the number of journeys we make in favor of video conferences as an easier and cheaper way to attain knowledge. This trend will continue, and some international conferences will offer the option to attend online. IFLA 2021 or LIBER Annual Conference next year will be held completely online. This trend involves a change of social habits and the economy itself, but it has very important advantages in terms of reducing the the carbon footprint, which is the goal number 13 of the UNESCO Sustainable Development Goals. The negative part is the loss of experiences and networking. COVID has had a huge impact on socialization. All these challenges have highlighted the importance of staff wellness. The future of work will include developing a stronger focus and a more holistic view of people well-being. And as an example, leaders will be seen as emotional caregivers as a step beyond coaches. Turning our attention now to leadership, libraries are purpose-driven organizations. People that work in our libraries should be engaged and committed. Our work is focused on user satisfaction and should be aligned with the strategy of our universities. We need consistent, strong leaders with great adaptability and integrity, but at the same time, enable leadership at all levels to give an advantage in terms of rapidly developing new services and supporting staff to adapt to new scenarios. We also should work in developing the teams for this disruptive world so they can anticipate, drive, accelerate, partner, and trust. As already mentioned, trust is a key attribute more than ever. Last but not least, having the library staff divided into teams, some working on site and others working from home, increases the complexity of management and task organization, as well as the difficulty to keep all the staff working within a joint culture. Moreover, it has an impact on staff size. And just to finalize, some reflects about budget cuts. In a recent survey of 100 senior librarians worldwide, 85% agreed that libraries will suffer some budget cuts in the coming years. In addition, American universities claim that in the United States, library budgets would not recover for the next 5 years. These cuts will affect libraries' human resources. We should be prepared to face hiring freezes or furloughs. Besides, it will be necessary to implement an agile retraining policy and to apply the Build Back Better concept, meaning that if there are cuts, we should apply changes, rethink again, and do it better. Thank you very much. And now I will hand over to Claire.
Thank you very much, Nuria. So I'm looking at the digital side of what we should keep, and this is focusing on 3 areas: work life, content, and engagement. So first of all, working digitally through COVID. So this touches on lots of what we've already heard. The rapid change to home working, people having laptops, etc., and different platforms to work from home, the joys of whether to video or not to video, and how you engage with people when they're not next to you in the same room, how we share content and work collaboratively. At the University of Leeds, we had a rapid change to use Microsoft Teams. And in the blue box, you can see some of the examples of how much that was a move for us. We've over 4,000 meetings a week across the staff and students at the University of Leeds, as well as over 20,000 staff and students logging on actively a day. But what do we keep from this? There's certain things, that we'll already have because people have used new tools. They'll have increased their digital literacy. They'll be more flexible with working with these tools and knowing that they can use them in meetings with one another. But we need to consider how that works when we go back to a new normal and we have some people from home and home at work. So this is my setup on the beginning of March when I was working from home, which wasn't optimal. And how were people working? So many still sat at home in their kitchens, bedrooms, etc. We need to look at what's working for our staff and what concerns they have about the new normal. So next is content. This has been a rapid acceleration of what we were already doing in libraries, moving to digital first, and in some cases digital only when we were in lockdown situations. For us in the UK, the increase of textbooks, and we're seeing letters going out about the increasing cost and how that's impacting library budgets as the cost of e-textbooks. Increasing in reading lists, signposting to open content when people couldn't get hold of those physical copies in the libraries when libraries were closed. Some libraries are using digitisation on demand to be able to get content available for researchers and students. At the University of Leeds, we were planning on going to e-only theses, but that was accelerated when our libraries were closed and people couldn't print and bind their theses. Increasing video and interactive content to use in lectures and synchronous teaching, and also increased academic publishing with people working and publishing more in journals. We've seen a huge increase in our reading lists at the University of Leeds, and also the use of e-textbooks. This is the first time that we've taken on year-long access to textbooks, and that's 188 so far this year. This is rapidly increasing, and because of the new publishing models with these that we're having to adapt to, that needs more time for staff getting used to the purchasing and adding these to our reading list. So what to keep? Well, this is just an acceleration of what we were seeing already with digital content. I'm sorry. But some of these will be permanent additions to our collections of digital content, just for this time of the pandemic. The increase in costs, we need to look at how we tackle these and making sure that the content we buy is accessible, but people still need access to our physical collections, be they through digitized or visiting our libraries. We need to consider what our users need to make access to this e-content, be it devices or good internet connection that stays available. And finally, digital engagement. So we've seen increases in online exhibitions, the use of Google Arts and Cultures, moving to fully online inquiries, even when sometimes our libraries were closed, that we wanted libraries inquiries still to be done online, so there's no physical interaction. Virtual conferences and webinars like today, recording as default, and that giving us ways to share our content beyond those who can just turn up at that time. Now, nearly all conferences, you can get the video straight away afterwards, whereas before it was only the rooms that they could record. Support. So we organised an event at Leeds to give people support for their dissertations with using online content in their dissertations. And that was done through webinars, through using tools to big audiences that previously we'd have done in lecture theatres. Well-being, how do we make sure that we're talking to people, giving them those interactions that was talked about earlier, to make sure that people are supported, be they our staff and our students and our colleagues. Adapting training and making sure it is available to people. And actually, we're seeing numbers increase as we turn our training from classroom-based to webinars, and people can join when they want to and not have to travel across campus. And studying virtually. So what do we keep from this? Digital engagement gives us greater reach and often increased attendance. It's a change to time commitment. People can't always block out a week in the same way they did if they were traveling. There's the environmental impact of not traveling around to conferences, etc. And we can increase diversity and inclusion. More staff can go along to these events. We're not having to pay for the travel for them. And we're increasing the numbers of who comes along. Next, I'm going to pass on to Fiona.
Thank you, Claire. In considering what we have changed and what we might keep, we need to take into account our physical spaces. Patrons use libraries for many reasons, but the physical space is perhaps treated as a given until suddenly, as in the case of COVID, it is taken away or access is strictly limited. Library leaders have had to respond rapidly to changing requirements dictated by ever-changing COVID regulations. Facilities that encouraged group study, shared spaces and collaborative working have had to be amended to respond to public health demands requiring no or limited access and socially distant, individualised working spaces. So how did our libraries respond? Here on this slide are some of the changes we have had to make. These changes were made in response to an immediate crisis, which many optimistically felt may run its course over a few months. But as we near the close of the year, with varying levels of restrictions still in place, library leaders now must consider how do we manage our physical spaces and facilities going forward. So what do we need to consider, bearing in mind that we may need to cope with cycles of greater and lesser restrictions for some time yet? It is noted that we need to maintain a sense of welcome and community. Anecdotally, we hear from our library users of the importance of the library space as conducive to study and research, and even as a place of respite. People's remote working situations can be challenging, to say the least. In considering our potential design restrictions, as one author noted, we need to sterilise the space and not the experience. So what do we keep in terms of our physical spaces? This is a subject of some debate, and of course will vary from one library setting to another, and from one campus to another. This slide lists a number of things we have considered, and we are interested to hear from others on this. Some of these may seem logical and straightforward for the longer term, such as clear signage, one-way systems, modular, flexible designs, self-service, touchless or voice command facilities. Others may inspire some debate amongst library leaders and their teams. For example, click and collect, a labour-intensive activity. But does it have a place for vulnerable patrons? Consider also collaborative study space management with other campus facilities. Is this a way to embed the library across campus in the provision of greater access to study spaces, or is it an administrative burden too great for many libraries to bear? What leadership considerations do we need to bear in mind as we step forward into our brave new world? Significant planning will be needed. All of us have been challenged this year to adapt and to adjust our services and plans to a pandemic environment. With the benefit of hindsight, we now need to take stock and plan for our future spaces. Flexibility of approach is essential. We as leaders will inevitably find ourselves navigating rapid response scenarios alongside long-term strategic planning for some time to come. Communication is vital. Not just the communications with our end users on access and services, or with our campus colleagues in the promotion of public health messages and campaigns, but critically with our own teams. As we move into a post-pandemic era, we may inherit a legacy of hybrid working practices that may now become the new normal. The physical workspace has changed. Office layouts are different to before. Remote working may become commonplace and routine. Leading and communicating with physically dispersed teams into the future will be an ongoing and significant challenge. The pandemic was unexpected practice. So to conclude on our section, Nuria spoke earlier about the 5 Rs, and it is our view that due to the cyclical nature of the current challenges and restrictions, we will need to add a 6th R, and this is resilience, a trait that has been well tested in us all this year. We need to be more than just leaders. We need to be resilient leaders, and we need to build resilient teams. And as we guide our teams and our services and our spaces into the post-pandemic age, resilience will become ever more important. And to conclude, we as leaders need to evaluate multiple factors as we move forward. Here on this slide, we have listed what we believe are key considerations. This is not an exhaustive list, and we will greatly welcome other opinions. And please feel free to share your thoughts in the chat area. So this concludes our part of the presentation. Thanks for your attention. And at this stage, I'm going to hand back to Elke, who hopefully will be able to come back to her part of the earlier presentation. Thanks to all.
Thanks, Fiona. And we'll go back to communication, and we'll hope that my internet connection holds this time. Yes. So Emma and Mark talked in the first part about work-related communication, but of course our work environment is, for most of us, more than just the building where we work. People are by definition social beings, and our work environments are like mini social cosmoses where, yes, we work, but it's also the place where we meet people, where we interact with colleagues, where we build social relationships. And if all goes well, it's also a place where we have fun. And for most people, those social interactions at work are really important for their overall well-being, for their mental health. But of course, because of Corona, most of us are confined to our own house, and we are forced to work from home. So how do we translate that social aspect of work to the new reality? And what can we as a library leader do to improve the well-being of our colleagues? And I think Najme kindly already showed you the Slido, and it will be interesting to see what you have answered. So how have you and your team and co-workers maintained social communication during the pandemic? So I see that team is really at the center of your answers there. So it was really interesting. And we'll certainly take that back. So thank you, Najme, for reminding us of the answers. So let's talk about what we as leaders can do to support the mental well-being of our employees during COVID. I think it's been a while since most of us have been on a plane, but I'm sure we can all remember those safety instructions at the beginning of each flight. And one of those instructions is put your own mask on first. And I think that's good advice, and it's good advice that also applies here. In order to lead and to be there for your coworkers, we need to make sure that we take care of ourselves and that we take our own advice. You will be probably telling your coworkers that, yeah, eat right, make sure you get enough sleep, get out when you can and when it's allowed, of course, and guard your work-life balance. But of course, we often forget ourselves, and that advice also applies to us. It will help us to build resilience, to stay motivated, but I think it's also important to act as role models and model healthy behaviors for our colleagues. If we keep sending out emails at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, or maybe even at midnight, they might feel obligated to do the same. I think secondly, now more than ever, it's important to lead with empathy and to put people first. People all react differently to this crisis, and it means something for some people. And I think it's important to stay available as much as possible for your coworkers, but also to adapt your leadership style to the needs of your employees. So for some of them, that means a lot of interaction. For some of them, they might be fine and they might be okay with just hearing you once or twice a week. Thirdly, be authentic. It's no use to pretend that we're all fine and we are not affected by this crisis, or that we have all the answers. That's not the case. And I think it's okay to tell your coworkers that you don't have all the answers, that you find these times challenging as well. And that helps, I think, to talk about it, to make it an okay subject to talk about it, and it can help your coworkers. On the other hand, it is essential to stay positive and to stay calm. If you start panicking, you can't expect your team to stay calm and to stay motivated. So keep encouraging your team, especially now. Show appreciation for all the work that's being done and thank them explicitly and be grateful. So how do we protect the mental well-being of our coworkers? Well, we need to try and gauge stress levels and engagement levels. And in order to do that, we have to stay in regular touch with our colleagues. So it's important to make time for those social interactions in our calendar. Make time for video interactions, for video meetings, and do that regularly. Also, you can start or end work meetings with social time, and really take time to ask your coworkers how they are doing, how they are feeling, and how they are coping. Of course, with respect for their privacy. Someone might not be able or not want to talk about it, but I think it's good to create time even during work meetings, and stay alert for signs of colleagues who are struggling. Of course, as a leader, we are not psychologists. We are not experts in these fields. But I think we can act as a sounding board, and we can refer colleagues who are struggling to the right instances. Also remember that you are not alone. Most of us work in a team, and that team can act as a safety net for other people and for our colleagues. They might choose to be there for each other, hope they are there for each other. You can also set up a buddy system to make sure that there is support. And I think in most of our organizations by now, the HR department will have set up some sort of help. So it's important that we make sure that everyone knows about these systems and that these resources are known to your colleagues so that you can refer them when necessary. As I mentioned in the beginning, for most people, those informal chats that they have at the office are really important. Chats at the coffee machines, lunches with their colleagues, even gossiping in the corners and the corridors of work. They're all essential parts of the social interaction at work. So how do we replace those traditional social communications in times of COVID? I think we need to formalize those informal connections and those informal moments, and we need to make an effort to keep those social aspects of our work environment, especially since some colleagues might feel socially isolated and might feel lonely at this time. So staying connected to other people, that produces oxytocin, and that in turn helps us to relax and to feel happy. So how do we do this? Well, we can schedule online one-to-ones. We can create online coffee breaks and have online lunches with our teammates. We can set up virtual chat rooms where people can chat during the morning or maybe in the afternoon. And we can change our team meetings to online team meetings. My team, for example, is a team of 35 people. Normally they meet in smaller teams, but every 6 to 8 weeks we have a large team meeting with all 35 of them. And the first half an hour of those team meetings I set aside to really make sure and check in with everyone. So they each get 1 minute to say how they are doing, but also to have some social chat. For example, last month I asked the question, which new hobbies or which kind of hobbies are you getting into these days? And we had some really interesting questions and a lot of comments from the colleagues as well in the chat. So it was interesting to see all that happening and to get to know your colleagues on another level. You can also use the postman to get some surprises to your co-workers. At KU Leuven, for example, we sent all of our co-workers just before the summer a letter with encouraging words, and we added a little package of forget-me-not seeds, so the flowers. So that's something small. It doesn't cost a lot of money. It doesn't cost a lot of effort, but I think it was really well received by our co-workers. Last week, we sent the St. Nicholas chocolates. St. Nicholas comes in Belgium on the 6th of December, and we don't have Santa Claus. So the chocolates for St. Nicholas were sent via the post. And that is something they're all waiting for at home, of course. Chocolate is always nice. Something else we did is walks in the forest. During the months of September and October, it was okay to meet your colleagues, up to 10 colleagues, outside and go for a walk. So that's something I did with my team. So we had about 7 people and we went for a walk in the forest. We had some hot chocolate afterwards. So it was really nice, especially since some of my co-workers hadn't seen each other for quite some time. So that was good. Also important, I think, is to keep celebrating big achievements or special occasions. For example, for New Year, we will be doing a kind of party box that we're going to send to everyone. If someone is retiring, it's also important not to just let that pass by, but you can create something or work on something online with all of your colleagues and make sure that that the person who is retiring gets these presents. At KU Leuven, we also have a yearly staff day, and that is something that we switched to an online staff day this year. So it was organized by our own staff, which was great. So everyone could use their talents and contribute to the staff day. We had an online quiz, which was great. We sent in pictures of ourselves when we were children, so we could guess who was who and what we looked like when we were 3 or 4 years old. We had an online escape room. We had some magic show. You can see it in the picture. We have one of our colleagues who is a magician in his spare time, and he put on a magic show for the colleagues. We had an online dance party. We had a library of comical clips, and we also set up blind dates. That is something that is still continuing till this day. So you can ask for a blind date, and then they set you up with someone else from the library that you probably don't know. And we had an online coloring contest. So lots of stuff, and I hope it gives you some inspiration to do some things in your own library, maybe set up some social communication this way. So I hope this inspires you. Of course, if you have any other examples, I would love to hear about them. And if you have other creative solutions for keeping up the social communication in your library, please let us know. Thank you. And I will give the word back to my colleagues.
Thanks so much, Elke. We've now come to the end of our talks. We've already had some really interesting questions in the chat. We've got two that we can kick off with immediately. Yes, and I should say it's now 2:01 in England, so it's 3:01 for those of you in other countries besides England and Ireland, I think, and perhaps some others like Portugal. But anyway, I'm hoping that a few of you will be able to hold on while we hopefully be able to answer some of the questions that have been raised in the chat. But to also say that for those of you who have to go and totally understand, that this will be, as I said before, it will be recorded, so you will have the chance to watch the bits that you may miss. So I would like to, first of all, kick off with the question from Tracy Stanley, who raises a really good, interesting question, which is, how do you, all those people on whom your budget depends and those people who you need to influence, how do you reach them at this time when you can't actually just stop them in the corridor or grab them as they run across the library or wherever it is that you normally grab them? So I'm going to put that to our speakers. Who would like to pick up that very interesting and not easy question?
Okay, Emma Nolan here at Malmö University. I just here in Sweden at Malmö University, we have representation for from the library on all the boards. So we meet the university staff in different boards, and it's a great meeting, I would say.
Thanks very much, Emma. Would any of the other speakers like to jump in with ideas that they've had or things they've watched colleagues do in the libraries? I certainly know that on my own side, I've definitely grabbed the opportunities that specific work issues have arisen. So if it wouldn't be somebody I would normally, just write to and say, can I have a one-to-one with you, because they might be the pro vice chancellor, the deputy vice chancellor, or whatever, I might use the pretext of some specific question on a project I was working on. Is there anybody else of the speakers that would like to jump in and offer their experience of this?
I'll just hop in as well. Just in terms of IT leaders in my own organisation, I have a fortnightly coffee break essentially scheduled with that person, which is quite useful. There's no fixed agenda. We just treat it as, an opportunity to catch up. Part of the chat is just general and friendly and, casual conversational things, but then we wind in a few other things for discussion as well. So I find that quite useful, and we pop it in the diary and keep it there as a regular thing. So if you have any kind of relationship established with somebody like that, it might be a place to start.
Thanks so much, Fiona. Nuria, did you want to input here?
Well, only to add some aspects, if all of us have to go virtual, so it's a question of just training with everybody and have time to to give to every person in order to reach their skills, no? And perhaps starting with more in a virtual wall, in a on-site wall, and then move to virtual. But some of the very good aspects that all these months we have achieved is that, as I said before, it's been a very immersive learning experiences. So I think that all of us have learned a lot and gone a lot virtual. And besides that, I would say that, for example, sorry, I'm a little lost here, no? But that, sorry. Yeah, during these months, for example, I've had more contact with board members of the board of the university than I ever had before. And this is because going virtual means that you can be very agile in order to meet people. So it's also can function with senior leaders or other kind of person, because you can start by phone or by using other channels and then move to Teams or whatever. That's just a comment I would like to say about this.
Thanks so much, Nuria. So I'm going to take one other question. Oh, and I would like to say I love the idea of a virtual walk and talk. Whenever somebody says walk and talk, I feel like I'm in some high-flying American film. But the idea of a virtual walk and talk is a lovely one as well. So we might take that as well. So I'm just going to take one other question, which I can thank Alan Carberry for, where he's actually saying, well, you know, what is normal, and let's not forget the painful but valuable lessons that we've learned. And how do we continue that momentum of positive change? We all know, as the panelists have said, we've acquired a lot more electronic content. People have changed, they've shifted. But I think underneath we can see quite a lot of it, and we can recognize it in ourselves as well. People thinking, oh, well, you know, I just need to wait. I need to hold on until this is over. But actually, there are positive lessons we can take with us. So, panelists, how would you like to address that question? Please do jump in.
Well, maybe I will answer this question. I think, yes, a lot has changed. And I think for the better, some things as well. I mean, this is a difficult time for all of us, but of course there have been positive changes. And I think some of them will be inspired by our staff because they don't want to go back to how it was before. So I think some changes might be easy to keep because going back is just not an option. I think for some of my staff, if I tell them in a few months' time, you have to be here 5 days a week in the office, they're just going to say, well, we've shown you that it's not necessary and that it can work. So can I please continue to work from home 1 or 2 days a week? And on the other hand, I think it's our job as a leader to indeed keep some of those positive changes and make sure that we tell our staff or our colleagues why it is important, how it has contributed in the last few months in a positive way, and why it's important to keep those changes. Fiona, I don't know if you have other experiences.
No, pretty much you've covered quite a lot of it. I was just thinking it might be a useful exercise for our leaders with their own teams to kind of essentially do what we've done here in this webinar and actually sit down and consider what are the things to keep and to let go as part of the whole process of surviving through COVID. And then, you know, by mutual agreement, some of it, you know, would be straightforward, I think. And then, you know, we can go from there if there's agreement on it. But like you say, yes, I think a lot of people will be keen to keep certain things, and then other things maybe could be considered if they have not yet been thought about.
Thanks so much, both of you. So it's a question of kind of using the positive momentum and reminding everybody that it's come from the staff themselves. So with that, unfortunately and reluctantly, I have to draw this webinar to a close. It's the final in the series of 2. And I would like to congratulate the emerging leaders, the current emerging leaders cohort, and those who have put this together off their own bat, off their own initiative. So thanks to Najme, Mark, Emma, Elke, Nuria, Claire, Fiona, and also to Tanya for her support. technical support, and Cecile for chairing the previous webinar, and the LIBER office as well for its support. And also to say that, of course, the Emerging Leaders cohort are people who are directly in their course affected by the webinar, by the pandemic, I should say. And so this is a very positive and leaderly-like response of them to have coordinated this. So I'd like to thank everybody. Thank you for your questions and for your participation and for being with us today. And please do go back and watch the webinar online when it is released, which it will be very soon. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.